She walked into the marble mansion with nothing but a worn leather bag and a quiet confidence that made billionaire. Rashid Al-Mansouri paused mid-sentence during his phone call. This woman from Ghana, who had applied to care for his elderly father, suffering from advanced Alzheimer's, carried herself differently than the dozens of caregivers who had come before her. What Rashid didn't know was that Esi Asante wasn't just another caregiver looking for work in the wealthy neighborhoods of Abu Dhabi. Hidden cameras throughout his estate would soon reveal a secret so shocking that it would turn everything he thought he knew about help, healing, and human dignity completely upside down. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun cast long shadows across the pristine corridors of the Al-Mansouri estate, but inside the master bedroom on the 3rd floor, darkness had settled in for what felt like an eternity. Rashid Al-Mansouri stood at the foot of his father's bed, watching the man who had once commanded respect across 3 continents now struggled to remember his own name. Ahmed Al-Mansouri, 78 years old, had built an oil trading empire that stretched from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean. He spoke 6 languages fluently, could recite poetry in Arabic that would bring grown men to tears, and had negotiated deals worth billions while other men slept. Now he couldn't remember how to tie his shoes. The diagnosis had come 18 months ago. Early onset Alzheimer's, aggressive and unforgiving. Since then, Rashid had watched his father disappear piece, memory by memory, until the man lying in the hospital-grade bed was barely a shadow of the giant who had raised him. "Another one quit," said Fatima, the head housekeeper, appearing in the doorway with resignation heavy in her voice. She held a resignation letter in her weathered hands, the 5th one this month. Rashid didn't turn around. He couldn't bear to see the pity in her eyes again. What was her excuse this time? She said it was too difficult. That your father ... double quotes. Fatima paused, choosing her words carefully. That he becomes violent when he's confused. The words hit Rashid like a physical blow. His father, violent. The man who had never raised his voice at a business meeting, who treated their household staff like extended family, who had taught Rashid that true strength came from protecting those weaker than yourself. The disease had stolen that gentleness, replacing it with fear and aggression that came from a mind that could no longer make sense of the world around it. "That's the 8th caregiver in 6 months, Rashid said, finally turning to face Fatima. His usually immaculate appearance showed signs of strain, his tie slightly askew, dark circles under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights spent listening for sounds of distress from down the hall. Fatima nodded sadly. "The agency says they're running out of people willing to take the position. Word has gotten around about." She gestured helplessly toward the bed where Ahmed lay sleeping, his breathing shallow and irregular. Rashid walked to the window overlooking the perfectly manicured gardens below. 3 gardeners moved like shadows among the palm trees and flower beds, maintaining an oasis of beauty that his father could no longer appreciate. The irony wasn't lost on him. He could afford the best of everything except the one thing money couldn't buy, his father's mind back. "What about international candidates?" Rashid asked, his business instincts kicking in. If the local talent pool was exhausted, he'd expand his search. There must be qualified caregivers from other countries who would be willing to relocate. Fatima's expression brightened slightly. "Actually, there is one application that came in yesterday, from Ghana. A woman named Esi Asante." She pulled a folder from under her arm. "Her credentials are impressive, and she specifically requested to work with Alzheimer's patients." Rashid took the folder, scanning the contents with the same attention he gave to multi-million-dollar contracts. Esi Asante, 34 years old, born in Accra. The photograph showed a woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile, her hair pulled back in a simple style that spoke of practicality over vanity. Her resume listed 5 years of experience in elderly care, specializing in dementia and Alzheimer's patients. References from families in London, where she had worked before deciding to relocate to the Middle East. What struck Rashid most was a handwritten note attached to the application. I believe every person deserves dignity in their final chapters, regardless of what their mind remembers. I would be honored to help your father find peace in his confusion. When can she start? Rashid asked, closing the folder. She's available immediately. She's actually staying at a hotel near the city center, waiting for a response. Rashid glanced back at his father, who had begun to stir restlessly in his sleep. Even unconscious, Ahmed seemed trapped in some internal struggle, his hands clutching at the blankets as if trying to hold on to memories that kept slipping away. Tell her to come this afternoon. I want to meet her before I make any decisions. As Fatima left to make the arrangements, Rashid remained by the window, lost in thought. In the 18 months since his father's diagnosis, he had hired neurologists from Johns Hopkins, specialists from Switzerland, and therapists who charged more per hour than most people made in a month. He had installed state-of-the-art monitoring equipment throughout the house, cameras in every room to ensure his father's safety and to review incidents when they occurred. The cameras had captured everything: his father's midnight wanderings through the house, looking for his long-dead wife. The moments of clarity when Ahmed would suddenly remember Rashid's name and reach for him with desperate love. The episodes of rage when confusion overwhelmed him, and he would throw objects or refuse to eat for days. But despite all the technology, all the expertise, all the money thrown at the problem, nothing had brought his father peace. Each caregiver had approached Ahmed as a medical case to be managed, rather than a human being to be understood. They followed protocols, administered medications on schedule, and documented behavioral incidents with clinical detachment. Perhaps what his father needed wasn't another expert. Perhaps what he needed was someone who saw him as more than a collection of symptoms to be contained. That afternoon, as the call to prayer echoed across the city, Rashid waited in his study for Esi Asante to arrive. He had reviewed her application 3 more times, looking for red flags or inconsistencies that might suggest she was just another caregiver looking for a well-paying position in a wealthy household. What he found instead intrigued him. Her previous employers spoke of her with unusual warmth. "She didn't just care for my mother," one reference letter read. "She gave her back her sense of self-worth." Mother looked forward to her visits more than she looked forward to visits from her own children. Another reference described how Esi had helped a man with dementia reconnect with his love of music, spending hours playing old songs until he began to sing along, remembering lyrics he had forgotten for years. When the doorbell rang, Rashid straightened his tie and prepared to conduct what he hoped would be his final interview for this position. He had no way of knowing that the woman about to enter his home would challenge everything he thought he knew about care, healing, and the true meaning of expertise. Esi Asante stepped through the front door with a quiet grace that immediately set her apart from the previous candidates. She wore a simple blue dress that was both professional and modest, and she carried herself with a confidence that seemed to come from within rather than from any need to impress. When she shook Rashid's hand, her grip was firm but gentle, and her eyes met his directly. "Thank you for seeing me on such short notice, Mr. Al-Mansouri," she said, her English accented with the melodic rhythms of her native Twi. "I understand your father is going through a difficult time." There was something in the way she said it, not suffering from Alzheimer's or dealing with dementia, but simply going through a difficult time, that made Rashid pause. It was the first time in months that someone had spoken about his father's condition without immediately reducing him to a medical diagnosis. "Please come in," Rashid said, leading her toward his study. "I'd like to discuss your experience and what this position would entail." As they walked through the marble corridors, Esi's eyes took in the opulent surroundings without any visible reaction. She didn't gawk at the crystal chandeliers or the priceless artwork that lined the walls. Instead, her attention seemed focused on details that others might miss: the quality of light coming through the windows, the acoustics of the hallway, the way the space felt rather than how it looked. In his study, Rashid gestured for her to sit in one of the leather chairs facing his desk, but Esi remained standing until he was seated first, a small gesture of respect that he appreciated. "Tell me about your experience with Alzheimer's patients," Rashid began, settling into his usual interview rhythm. Esi leaned forward slightly, her hands folded in her lap. "I've learned that Alzheimer's doesn't just take memories, Mr. Al-Mansouri. It takes dignity. My role isn't to fight the disease. That's a battle for doctors and medications. My role is to help preserve the person inside the condition, to find ways to connect with who they still are, even when they can't remember who they were." Rashid found himself leaning forward as well, drawn in by her perspective. "And how do you do that?" "By listening with more than my ears," she replied. "Your father may not be able to tell me he's thirsty, but his body language can. He may not remember your name, but he might remember how safe he felt when you held his hand as a child. People with Alzheimer's live in the moment. They can't access yesterday or plan for tomorrow. So I try to make each moment as peaceful and meaningful as possible." As she spoke, Rashid realized he was hearing something he hadn't heard from any of the previous candidates: genuine understanding of his father's humanity rather than just his medical needs. "What would a typical day look like with my father?" he asked. Yes, I smiled, and for the first time since the interview began, her formal demeanor softened. "There would be no typical day, because your father isn't a typical patient. Some mornings he might wake up thinking he's 30 years old and ready to go to work. Other mornings he might be a child looking for his mother. My job would be to meet him wherever he is on that particular day and help him feel safe and valued in that moment." Rashid sat back in his chair, stunned by the simplicity and wisdom of her approach. After months of hearing about behavior management strategies and pharmaceutical interventions, here was someone talking about meeting his father where he was rather than trying to force him back to where he used to be. "When could you start?" he asked, surprising himself with how quickly he had made his decision. "Tomorrow morning, if you'd like," Esi replied. "I believe the sooner I can begin building a relationship with your father, the better." As Rashid walked her to the door, he couldn't shake the feeling that something significant had just happened. For the first time in months, he felt a glimmer of hope that perhaps his father's remaining days could be filled with peace rather than confusion, dignity rather than fear. What he didn't know was that Esi Asante carried secrets that would soon transform not just his father's final chapter, but everything Rashid thought he knew about the woman he had just hired to care for the most precious person in his world. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The next morning arrived with the soft golden light that Abu Dhabi was famous for, filtering through the palm trees that lined the Al-Mansouri estate. Rashid had barely slept, his mind racing with questions about whether he had made the right decision hiring Esi so quickly. Every other caregiver had seemed perfect on paper too, only to crumble under the reality of his father's condition. He stood in his home office at 6:30 a.m., reviewing the security camera feeds that monitored every corner of the house. The system was state-of-the-art, installed after the third caregiver had claimed Ahmed had struck her, an accusation Rashid needed to verify given his father's previous gentle nature. The cameras had revealed the truth. His father had been reaching for a glass of water, his motor control compromised by the disease, and had accidentally knocked over a lamp. The caregiver had overreacted, turning an innocent gesture into grounds for immediate resignation. Since then, Rashid monitored everything, not out of mistrust, but out of necessity. The cameras captured his father's behavioral patterns, helped identified triggers for his confusion, and provided evidence when caregivers made false claims about violent incidents that never actually occurred. At precisely 7 a.m., Esi arrived. Rashid watched through the front entrance camera as she approached the door, noting how she paused to observe the garden fountain, her head tilted slightly as if she were listening to something beyond the sound of flowing water. Most caregivers rushed to the door, eager to start their shifts and get through another day. Esi seemed to be absorbing the environment, understanding the space she was about to enter. Fatima greeted her at the door and led her through the house toward Ahmed's wing. Rashid switched between camera feeds, following their progress through the corridors. He watched as Esi walked slowly, not rushing, her eyes taking in details that others missed: the height of the door handles, the texture of the floor tiles, the way natural light moved through the spaces. "Mr. Ahmed is having one of his difficult mornings," Fatima explained as they approached the bedroom. "He woke up asking for his wife Amira, who passed away 15 years ago. When I tried to redirect him, he became agitated." Through the bedroom camera, Rashid could see his father sitting on the edge of his bed, fully dressed in a business suit that hung loosely on his diminished frame. Ahmed was holding an old photograph of his deceased wife, staring at it with the intense concentration of someone trying to solve an impossible puzzle. "She's late for our dinner reservation," Ahmed was saying to no one in particular, his voice carrying the authority it once held in boardrooms. "I specifically told the driver to have the car ready by 7. Amira hates to be late." Rashid's heart clenched as he watched the scene unfold on his monitor. This was the cruelest aspect of the disease, not just the memory loss, but the way it trapped his father in moments of the past, unable to understand why the present didn't match his expectations. Fatima knocked gently on the bedroom door. "Mr. Ahmed, I've brought someone to meet you." Ahmed looked up, his eyes narrowing with suspicion. "I don't have any meetings scheduled today. Tell them to contact my assistant on Monday." Esi stepped into the room, and Rashid leaned closer to his monitor, watching her every move. Instead of introducing herself immediately or trying to correct Ahmed's confusion about the day or year, she simply stood quietly near the doorway, allowing Ahmed to process her presence without feeling threatened. "You have a beautiful photograph," she said finally, her voice warm and genuinely interested. "Your wife?" Ahmed's suspicious expression softened immediately. "Amira," he said, holding up the picture with pride. "We're going to dinner tonight. She loves the restaurant at the Burj Al Arab, the one that looks like a sail." Rashid frowned, reaching for his phone to intervene. The Burj Al Arab was in Dubai, not Abu Dhabi, and that restaurant had closed years ago. Every other caregiver had made the mistake of correcting these details, which inevitably led to Ahmed becoming defensive and agitated. But Esi surprised him. "She looks lovely," Esi said, moving closer to examine the photograph. "What's her favorite dish there?" Ahmed's face lit up with the joy of someone being asked about their greatest treasure, the lamb with saffron rice. "But she always asks them to go easy on the spices. She has a delicate stomach." He paused, studying Esi's face. "Are you our server tonight? You're early." Rashid held his breath, waiting for Esi to correct the misconception. Instead, she smiled gently. "I'm here to make sure everything is perfect for your evening," she said. "But first, would you like to freshen up? A gentleman like yourself always wants to look his best for such an important dinner." Ahmed nodded enthusiastically. Yes, of course. Amira notices everything: my tie, my cologne, whether I've shaved properly." He stood up, still holding the photograph. "Could you help me choose the right tie? I want to look perfect for her." What Rashid witnessed next through the cameras left him speechless. Esi didn't just help his father select a tie, she entered fully into his reality. She examined several ties with the seriousness of a fashion consultant, holding them up to the light and considering each one carefully. "This blue one brings out your eyes," she said, selecting the silk tie that had been his father's favorite decades ago. Mrs. Amira will be impressed. As she helped Ahmed adjust the tie, Rashid noticed something extraordinary happening. His father's hands, which usually trembled with anxiety and confusion, became steady. His breathing, typically shallow and rapid during episodes of disorientation, deepened and calmed. The worried lines around his eyes relaxed. "You're very kind," Ahmed said to Esi as she finished with his tie. "Amira will like you. She appreciates people who pay attention to details." "I would be honored to meet her," Esi replied. "But I notice it's still quite early for dinner. Perhaps you'd like to take a walk in the garden while we wait? I saw some beautiful roses that would make a lovely bouquet for Mrs. Amira." Ahmed's eyes brightened. She loves roses. Yellow ones especially. They remind her of the garden at her childhood home in Lebanon. Rashid watched in amazement as Esi guided his father out of the bedroom and toward the garden. No struggle, no resistance, no medication needed to calm his agitation. Instead, Ahmed walked beside her with the confident stride of a man with purpose, still carrying Amira's photograph, but no longer clutching it with desperate confusion. In the garden, Esi's approach continued to astound Rashid. She didn't simply redirect Ahmed's attention, she built upon his memories, however fragmented they might be. When Ahmed mentioned that Amira loved the sound of fountains, Esi guided him to the water feature, and they stood listening together. When he talked about how his wife used to hum while gardening, she asked if he remembered any of the songs. To Rashid's shock, Ahmed began to hum a melody, something Rashid hadn't heard his father do in over a year. It was an old Arabic song, one his mother used to sing while preparing dinner. Ahmed's voice was rusty and uncertain, but the melody was there, buried beneath layers of forgotten time. "That's beautiful," Esi said. "Would you teach it to me? I'd love to learn songs that made Mrs. Amira happy." For the next hour, Rashid watched his father teach Esi the melody, both of them sitting on the garden bench, Ahmed's voice growing stronger and more confident with each repetition. When they finished, Ahmed was smiling, not the confused, anxious expression Rashid had grown accustomed to, but a genuine smile of satisfaction and connection. "You're a quick learner," Ahmed told Esi. "Amira would say you have a musical ear." "Thank you," Esi replied. "I think she must have been a wonderful teacher to inspire such beautiful music." Around noon, Ahmed began to show signs of fatigue, a common pattern Rashid had observed. Usually, this was when his father became most confused and difficult, as his mental energy depleted and his ability to process reality diminished. Rashid prepared for the inevitable meltdown, reaching for his phone to call the doctor if sedation became necessary. But once again, Esi surprised him. "Mr. Ahmed," she said gently, "I think Mrs. Amira would want you to rest before your dinner tonight. A gentleman needs his energy for such an important evening." Ahmed nodded thoughtfully. "Yes, she always insisted I take a proper rest. She said it made me more handsome." He chuckled at the memory. "Can you make sure I'm awakened in time to dress properly?" "Of course," Esi assured him. "I'll make sure. Everything is ready for your special evening." As she helped Ahmed back to his room, Rashid noticed how she moved, not rushing him, not treating him like an invalid, but walking beside him like an equal. When Ahmed stumbled slightly on the stairs, she offered her arm for support, without making him feel dependent or weak. In his bedroom, Ahmed settled into his favorite chair for his afternoon rest, still holding Amira's photograph. "You'll stay nearby?" he asked Esi, and for the first time, Rashid heard vulnerability in his father's voice rather than confusion. "I'll be right here," Esi promised. "Rest well." As Ahmed closed his eyes, Esi remained in the room, not hovering or watching anxiously, but simply present. She pulled out a small notebook and began writing, and Rashid found himself curious about what observations she was recording. Through the security cameras, he watched her work throughout the afternoon. When Ahmed woke from his nap confused about where he was, Esi gently reminded him about his dinner plans with Amira, and his anxiety immediately subsided. When he asked for his business papers because he thought he had a meeting, she helped him organize old documents that Fatima brought from storage, allowing him to feel productive and important. But what struck Rashid most was what he observed. In the moments when Ahmed wasn't aware Esi was watching, she would study his movements, his expressions, his gestures with the intensity of someone decoding a complex language. She seemed to be learning not just his symptoms, but his essence, the man he had been before the disease began erasing pieces of his identity. As evening approached, Ahmed became anxious about his dinner reservation again. Previous caregivers had tried various strategies to handle this recurring delusion: distraction, medication, sometimes even calling the doctor for emergency sedation. Esi chose a different path. "Mr. Ahmed," she said, approaching him as he stood by the window, "I have something to tell you about tonight's dinner." Rashid tensed, expecting Ahmed to become agitated when Esi finally broke the illusion. "Mrs. Amira called earlier," Esi continued. "She asked me to tell you that she's not feeling well tonight and would prefer to have a quiet dinner at home instead. She said she'd rather spend the evening just with you, somewhere comfortable and familiar." Ahmed's face showed concern for his wife, but not confusion or anger. "She's not well? What's wrong?" "Nothing serious," Esi assured him. "She just thought a peaceful evening at home would be nicer. She asked me to prepare her favorite tea and some light food that would be easy on her stomach." Yes, of course," Ahmed said immediately. "Amira's health comes first. We can go to the restaurant another time." He paused, looking around the room as if seeing it clearly for the first time in hours. "This is our home, isn't it?" "Yes," Esi said gently. "This is your home where you and Mrs. Amira were happy together." Ahmed nodded slowly, and Rashid watched his father's expression shift as fragments of reality began to resurface. For a moment, confusion flickered across his features, but Esi's calm presence seemed to anchor him. "She's not coming to dinner, is she?" Ahmed asked quietly. "No," Esi replied with infinite gentleness. "But her love is still here with you, and I'm here to make sure you're comfortable and cared for." Ahmed sat down heavily in his chair, the photograph of Amira still in his hands. For several minutes he said nothing, and Rashid worried that the return to reality might trigger one of his father's episodes of despair or rage. Instead, Ahmed looked up at Esi with clear, lucid eyes. "Thank you," he said simply, "for letting me spend the day with her." Rashid felt tears burning his eyes as he watched the scene unfold. In one day, this woman from Ghana had accomplished what months of medical intervention had failed to achieve. She had given his father peace, dignity, and connection to the man he used to be. As the day ended and Esi prepared to leave for the evening, Rashid found himself eager for tomorrow's footage. For the first time since his father's diagnosis, he looked forward to what the cameras might reveal. What he didn't yet know was that Esi's extraordinary abilities with Ahmed were just the beginning of a mystery that would challenge everything. He thought he understood about expertise, education, and the true meaning of healing. 3 weeks had passed since Esi began caring for Ahmed, and the transformation in the Al-Mansouri household was undeniable. Where once the mornings had been filled with the sounds of confusion and distress, there was now an almost peaceful rhythm. Rashid found himself actually looking forward to reviewing the security footage each evening, not out of concern for his father's safety, but out of genuine curiosity about what new breakthrough Esi might achieve. But it was during the 4th week that Rashid began to notice something that would completely change his understanding of the woman he had hired. It started with a medical emergency that no one could have predicted. Ahmed had been having what Esi called a clear day, one of those rare moments when the fog of Alzheimer seemed to lift temporarily, allowing glimpses of the sharp mind that had once negotiated million-dollar deals. He had been sitting in the garden with Esi, discussing the architecture of the house with surprising lucidity, when suddenly he collapsed. Rashid was in his Dubai office when Fatima's panicked call came through. "Sir, your father has collapsed. Esi is with him, but we need to call an ambulance immediately." "Call them now," Rashid ordered, his heart racing as he grabbed his keys. "I'm on my way." The drive from Dubai to Abu Dhabi had never felt longer. Rashid's mind raced with worst-case scenarios, but when he burst through the front door of his home 45 minutes later, what he found was not the chaos he had expected. Ahmed was conscious, lying on the living room sofa with his head elevated on cushions. His color had returned, and while he looked tired, he was alert and responsive. Esi knelt beside him, her fingers gently pressed against his wrist, counting his pulse with the focused concentration of someone who knew exactly what she was doing. "How is he?" Rashid asked, rushing to his father's side. "His pulse is steady. Now 72 beats per minute," Esi reported with clinical precision. "Blood pressure appears normal based on his color and alertness. Pupils are equal and reactive. No signs of stroke or cardiac distress." Rashid paused, struck by the medical terminology and the systematic way she was assessing his father's condition. "How do you know all of that?" Before Esi could answer, the paramedics arrived. Rashid watched in fascination as Esi briefed them with the efficiency of a medical professional. "Patient is a 78-year-old male with advanced Alzheimer's disease," she began, her accent somehow less pronounced as she slipped into what sounded like medical presentation mode. "Sudden onset of syncope approximately 1 hour ago while sitting upright. Episode lasted approximately 30 seconds. Patient regained consciousness immediately upon fall into horizontal position. No incontinence, no seizure activity observed. Blood glucose was checked and is within normal limits at 110. Current vitals are stable." The lead paramedic looked impressed. "Are you a nurse?" Esi hesitated for just a moment before answering. "I have medical training." As the paramedics conducted their examination, confirming Esi's assessment and determining that Ahmed had likely experienced a simple fainting episode due to dehydration and medication interaction, Rashid found himself studying the woman who had been caring for his father. Medical training. What kind of medical training did a caregiver from Ghana possess that allowed her to conduct such a thorough neurological assessment? How did she know to check blood glucose levels? And where had she gotten a glucose monitor in the first place? After the paramedics left with recommendations for follow-up with Ahmed's cardiologist, Rashid asked Esi to join him in his study. Ahmed was resting comfortably, his episode having passed without lasting effects, but Rashid had questions that couldn't wait. "You handled that situation remarkably well," he began, settling into his desk chair while Esi took the seat across from him. "I'm glad Mr. Ahmed is feeling better," she replied, but Rashid noticed she seemed more guarded than usual. "Where did you learn to conduct medical assessments like that? Your resume mentioned elderly care experience, but what you did today ... that was more advanced than basic caregiver training." C's hands folded in her lap, and for the first time since he'd known her, she appeared uncomfortable. "I've worked with many elderly patients over the years. You learn to recognize signs and symptoms." "Esi," Rashid said gently, "I'm not questioning your abilities. If anything, I'm amazed by them. But I'm curious about your background. You clearly have more medical knowledge than you initially indicated." There was a long pause before Esi spoke again. "In Ghana, I worked in healthcare for several years before coming to the UK, and then here. My experience has been ... comprehensive." It was a diplomatic answer that revealed nothing while appearing to explain everything. Rashid decided not to push further at that moment, but his curiosity was thoroughly aroused. That evening, as he reviewed the security footage from the day, Rashid paid special attention to Esi's actions during and after Ahmed's collapse. What he saw confirmed his suspicions that there was much more to her story than she had revealed. The moment Ahmed had started to fall, Esi had reacted with the lightning-fast reflexes of someone trained in emergency response. She had positioned herself to break his fall, checked his airway immediately, and then proceeded through what appeared to be a systematic neurological assessment that would have impressed any emergency room physician. But it was what happened. After the paramedics left that truly caught Rashid's attention. Ahmed had been resting, and Esi had stepped into the hallway to make a phone call. The security camera captured only her side of the conversation, but her body language had changed completely. Gone was the gentle, deferential caregiver. In her place stood someone who spoke with authority and medical precision, although the audio quality wasn't clear enough to make out her exact words. Rashid could see her consulting notes she had written, referring to what appeared to be a detailed medical timeline, and speaking with the confidence of someone reporting to a colleague or supervisor rather than calling a family member or friend. Intrigued, Rashid decided to do something he had never done before: investigate one of his employees more thoroughly. The next morning, while Ahmed and Esi were having their usual garden time, Rashid made some calls. His first was to the agency that had recommended Esi, but their information matched exactly what she had provided on her application. References from London checked out, previous employers gave glowing recommendations, and her work history seemed consistent, but something was nagging at him. The way she had handled the medical emergency, her systematic approach to Ahmed's care, even the small details like how she organized medication schedules and monitored his father's physical condition, everything pointed to formal medical education that went far beyond basic caregiver training. His breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Dr. Hassan Mahmoud, Ahmed's neurologist, called that afternoon to follow up on the previous day's incident. During their conversation, he made an observation that stopped Rashid in his tracks. "I have to say, Rashid, whoever is caring for your father now is doing an exceptional job. The notes I received from the paramedics indicate that the initial assessment was conducted with remarkable skill. Has he been assigned a new nurse?" "No. It's still the same caregiver we hired last month, Esi Asante." "Interesting." The paramedics mentioned that her evaluation was so thorough and accurate that they initially assumed she was a physician. Her documentation of symptoms and vital signs was more detailed than what we typically see from most nursing staff. After ending the call, Rashid sat in his office, pieces of a puzzle beginning to form in his mind. He pulled up Esi's application. Again, this time reading between the lines of what she had and hadn't said. Her references were all from private families, not medical institutions. Her work history showed gaps that could have accommodated formal education. And now he remembered something that had struck him as odd during their initial interview, when he had asked about her experience with Alzheimer's patients. She had spoken about the disease with the understanding of someone who had studied it academically, not just observed it professionally. That evening, Rashid made a decision that would change everything. He waited until Esi had finished her evening routine with Ahmed and was preparing to leave for her small apartment in the city. Instead of letting her go as usual, he asked her to join him for tea in the garden. "I wanted to thank you again for how you handled yesterday's emergency," he began, watching her face carefully. "My father's neurologist was very impressed with your assessment." "I'm glad I could help," Esi replied, but Rashid noticed the slight tension in her shoulders. He actually thought you might be a physician, based on the quality of your evaluation. Esi's cup paused halfway to her lips, and in that moment, Rashid saw something flash across her features, not guilt or fear, but resignation, as if she had been waiting for this conversation. "See," he said gently, "I need to ask you directly. Are you a doctor?" The silence stretched between them, filled only by the sound of the fountain and the distant call to prayer echoing across the city. When Esi finally looked up, her eyes held a mixture of sadness and relief. "Yes," she said quietly. "I am." Rashid felt his world shift. "You're a physician." "A real doctor." "I was a physician," she corrected. In Ghana, I was a neurologist. I specialized in degenerative diseases, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, dementia. I had my own practice in Accra, published research, taught at the medical university. Was? Rashid asked, though he suspected the answer would be complicated. Esi set down her teacup and looked out at the garden where she had spent so many peaceful hours with Ahmed. Things became difficult in Ghana. Political instability, economic challenges. When the opportunity came to relocate to London, I thought it would be temporary. But medical degrees don't always transfer easily between countries. The certification process, the examinations, the costs. She paused, choosing her words carefully. I needed to work to support myself and my family back home. Elderly care was a way to use my medical knowledge while I navigated the bureaucracy of credential recognition. But then life happened, and temporary solutions became permanent circumstances. Rashid stared at her, trying to process what he was hearing. You've been caring for my father as if you were just a caregiver, but you're actually more qualified than most of the specialists we've consulted. Qualifications on paper don't always translate to qualifications in practice, Esi said with a sad smile. Here, I am a caregiver from Ghana. In my home country, I was Dr. Esi Asante, but that title doesn't follow me across borders. Why didn't you tell me? When I interviewed you, when you started working here, why didn't you mention your medical background? Esi was quiet for a long moment. Would you have believed me? A woman from Africa claiming to be a neurologist, applying for a caregiver position. Or would you have assumed I was lying to justify higher pay? The question hit Rashid like a physical blow, because he knew the answer. In his world of credentials and connections, where degrees from prestigious universities and recommendations from powerful people carried more weight than actual ability, he might very well have dismissed her claims as exaggeration or fraud. Besides, Esi continued, your father needed care, not credentials. What mattered was whether I could help him, not what degrees I had earned in another country. As they sat in the gathering darkness, with the lights of Abu Dhabi beginning to twinkle in the distance, Rashid realized that everything he thought he knew about expertise, authority, and value had just been turned upside down. The most qualified person to care for his father had been hiding in plain sight, disguised as a simple caregiver because the world couldn't see past her accent, her nationality, and her circumstances to recognize the brilliant mind that lay beneath. Tomorrow he would have to decide what to do with this revelation that changed everything. The revelation about Esi's true identity kept Rashid awake for most of the night. He found himself pacing his bedroom, wrestling with emotions he hadn't expected. Guilt, admiration, anger at a system that had wasted such talent, and a growing sense of responsibility that extended far beyond his father's care. By morning, he had made a decision that would set everything in motion. Rashid arrived at his father's wing earlier than usual, finding Esi already there, helping Ahmed with his morning routine. The dynamic between them looked different to him now. Where before he had seen a skilled caregiver intuitively understanding her patient, he now recognized a trained neurologist applying years of specialized education to provide the exact care his father needed. See, he said quietly, could I speak with you privately after you've finished with my father? She nodded, and he caught something in her expression, not fear, but a kind of weary preparedness, as if she had been expecting this conversation since the moment she had revealed her secret. An hour later, they met in his study. This time, Rashid didn't sit behind his desk in the position of authority. Instead, he chose the chair beside hers, sensing that this conversation required equality rather than hierarchy. I've been thinking about what you told me last night, he began, and I have a proposition for you. Esi's eyebrows raised slightly, but she remained silent. I want to help you get your medical credentials recognized here in the UAE. I have connections with the medical board, relationships with hospitals. If you're willing, I'd like to sponsor your certification process. For a moment, Esi's composed facade cracked, revealing a glimpse of the dream she had been forced to set aside. But then she shook her head slowly. That's very generous, Mr. Al-Mansouri, but the process can take years. Your father needs care now, and I've committed to providing that care. We can hire another caregiver for my father while you pursue your certification, Rashid insisted. After what I've witnessed, I know he'll never receive better care than what you provide. But, no. Esi's voice was firm but gentle. I made a promise to your father. Even if he can't remember it from day to day, I don't abandon my patients. Rashid stared at her, struck by the ethical strength that had guided her decisions. Here was a woman who could have revealed her credentials from the beginning, could have demanded recognition and compensation befitting her qualifications, but instead had chosen to honor a commitment made under different circumstances. Then, what if we found a way to do both? He asked. What if you could continue caring for my father while also beginning to practice medicine again? Esi looked puzzled. I don't understand how that would be possible. Rashid leaned forward, an idea taking shape in his mind. My father isn't the only elderly person in Abu Dhabi dealing with Alzheimer's or dementia. There are dozens of wealthy families struggling with the same challenges we faced, finding qualified, compassionate care for their loved ones. What if we created something new? A specialized care facility that combined your medical expertise with your approach to treating patients as whole human beings, rather than just collections of symptoms. The silence that followed was heavy with possibility. Esi's eyes had widened, and Rashid could see her mind working through the implications of what he was suggesting. You're talking about starting a medical practice, she said slowly. I'm talking about revolutionizing elder care in this region, Rashid replied, his business instincts now fully engaged. Think about it, a facility where families don't have to choose between medical expertise and compassionate care, where doctors understand that treating the disease means caring for the person, where someone like my father could receive the best of both worlds. Esi was quiet for a long time, and when she finally spoke, her voice carried both hope and caution. The medical board would never approve a facility run by someone whose credentials aren't recognized here. But they would approve a facility run by someone whose credentials are in the process of being recognized, especially if that person had the backing of prominent families and the support of established physicians, Rashid countered. Dr. Mahmoud has been singing your praises since yesterday's incident. I suspect he'd be interested in a conversation about collaboration. Over the next several days, Rashid threw himself into research with the same intensity he brought to major business deals. He reached out to contacts in the medical community, investigated the requirements for establishing healthcare facilities, and began to understand the complex web of regulations and relationships that governed medical practice in the UAE. What he discovered both frustrated and motivated him. The barriers that had prevented Esi from practicing medicine weren't just bureaucratic, they were systemic, designed in ways that made it nearly impossible for qualified physicians from certain countries to gain recognition, regardless of their actual abilities. But he also found allies in unexpected places. Dr. Mahmoud, when approached about Esi's background, was immediately interested in meeting with her professionally. I've been saying for years that we need more specialists who understand the cultural and emotional aspects of dementia care, he told Rashid during their phone conversation. If this woman has both the medical training and the patient-centered approach you've described, she could revolutionize how we treat these conditions. A prominent Emirati businessman, whose own mother had struggled with dementia, expressed immediate interest in supporting a facility that could provide better care than what was currently available. We have the money to build the most advanced medical facilities in the world, he said, but we haven't figured out how to make them places where our parents actually want to be. Even the Ministry of Health, when approached through proper channels, showed surprising openness to innovative approaches to elder care, particularly ones that could serve as models for the region. But it was Ahmed himself who provided the most compelling argument for moving forward. During what had become their regular evening tea in the garden, Rashid broached the subject with his father during one of his clearer moments. "Baba," he said, using the Arabic word for father that Ahmed had begun to recognize again, "how would you feel about Esi helping other families the way she's helped us?" Ahmed looked across the garden to where Esi was watering the plants that had become part of their daily routine. "She has a gift," he said, his voice carrying the wisdom that occasionally surfaced through the fog of his disease. "Gifts are meant to be shared, not hidden. What if sharing that gift meant she couldn't spend as much time with you?" Ahmed considered this carefully. "When I was building my business, I had to choose between keeping all my knowledge to myself or teaching others so they could help more people. The choice was easy." He paused, watching Esi work with the roses. "That woman saved my mind, Rashid. If she can save other minds too, how can we ask her not to?" That night, Rashid made a decision that would change all their lives. He called Esi and asked her to meet him in his study one more time. When she arrived, he had documents spread across his desk: incorporation papers, medical facility licensing requirements, and a detailed business plan that had taken him 3 sleepless nights to develop. "I've been thinking about our conversation," he began, "and I've realized I approached it wrong. I was asking you to choose between caring for my father and practicing medicine. But what if those weren't opposing choices? What if they were the same choice?" He gestured to the papers on his desk. "I want to propose a partnership. You and I creating the first comprehensive dementia care facility in the Gulf region. A place where families can bring their loved ones, knowing they'll receive both world-class medical care and the kind of compassionate attention you've given my father." Esi's eyes moved over the documents, and Rashid could see her processing not just the immediate opportunity, but the broader implications of what he was suggesting. "You would be the medical director," he continued, "while your credentials are being processed. Dr. Mahmoud has agreed to serve as supervising physician and to advocate for your certification with the medical board. We'd start small, perhaps 10 to 15 patients, but with the goal of expanding as we prove the model works." "And your father?" Esi asked. The question that he knew would be her primary concern would be our first patient. He'd receive the same level of care he gets now, but in a setting where that care could also benefit others. Rashid paused, meeting her eyes. "I've learned something important these past few weeks, Esi. My father doesn't need me to hide him away in isolation. He needs to be part of something meaningful, something that honors who he was and who he still is." Esi sat back in her chair, and for the first time since he'd known her, Rashid saw tears in her eyes. "When I left Ghana," she said quietly, I thought I was giving up everything I had worked for. I told myself that caring for one patient at a time was enough, that making a difference in one family's life was worthwhile, even if it meant abandoning my larger dreams." She looked up at him, and her voice grew stronger. "But what you're describing, it's not just about getting my credentials back. It's about creating something that doesn't exist yet. Something that could change how people experience the worst moments of their lives. Is that a yes?" Rashid asked, hardly daring to hope. As I smiled, and for the first time, it was the full, radiant smile of someone whose hidden dreams were suddenly within reach. "Yes, Mr. Al-Mansouri, it's a yes." As they shook hands across the desk that night, both of them knew they were embarking on something that would transform not just their own lives, but the lives of countless families facing the heartbreak of watching their loved ones disappear into the fog of dementia. But neither of them could predict the challenges that lay ahead, or the moment of crisis that would test everything they were trying to build. Outside the study windows, the lights of Abu Dhabi sparkled like promises in the desert night, and somewhere in the medical wing of the house, Ahmed Al-Mansouri slept. peacefully, surrounded by the quiet dignity that one remarkable woman had given back to him. The real work was about to begin. 6 weeks after, Rashid and Esi had shaken hands on their partnership. Their ambitious plans hit their first major obstacle, and it came from the last place Rashid had expected. The morning started like any other. Esi had arrived early to help Ahmed with his breakfast routine, and Rashid was in his home office reviewing architectural plans for the proposed dementia care facility when his assistant called with urgent news. "Sir, your brother Hassan is here, and he's brought several people with him. They're asking to speak with you immediately about a family matter." Rashid's stomach dropped. Hassan had been conspicuously absent since their heated exchange about Esi weeks earlier, but Rashid had assumed his brother had simply chosen to focus on his own responsibilities within their business empire. The fact that Hassan had arrived with what sounded like an entourage suggested something far more serious was brewing. "Send them to the main conference room," Rashid said, straightening his tie. "I'll be there in 5 minutes." When Rashid entered the conference room, he found Hassan seated at the head of the polished mahogany table, flanked by 2 men Rashid recognized as prominent members of Abu Dhabi's business community: Halil Al-Zahra, who owns several private hospitals, and Omar Ben Said, whose family controlled significant healthcare investments across the region. But it was the 4th person in the room who surprised him most: Dr. Amjad Qureshi, the head of neurology at the city's most prestigious medical center, and a man Rashid had met at several social functions over the years. "Hassan," Rashid said carefully, taking a seat across from his brother. "This is unexpected, gentlemen." He nodded to the others. Hassan's expression was grave, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of someone delivering an ultimatum. "Rashid, we need to discuss this medical facility project you've been planning. There are serious concerns that need to be addressed." "What kind of concerns?" Rashid asked, though he was beginning to suspect where this conversation was heading. Halil Al-Zahra leaned forward, his voice smooth but edged with authority. "We understand you're planning to establish a dementia care facility in partnership with ... double quote, he consulted a folder in front of him, "a woman named Esi Asante, who you've employed as a caregiver." "That's correct," Rashid replied evenly. "Is there a problem with that?" Dr. Qureshi spoke up, his tone professional but condescending. "Mr. Al-Mansouri, I'm sure this woman provides excellent care for your father, but establishing a medical facility requires more than good intentions. It requires proper medical oversight, recognized credentials, and adherence to strict regulatory standards. Which is why Dr. Mahmoud has agreed to serve as supervising physician while Ms. Asante completes her credential recognition process." Rashid countered. Omar bin Said chuckled, and the sound carried a dismissiveness that made Rashid's jaw tighten. "Rashid, you're a successful businessman. Surely you understand the difference between hiring household help and establishing a medical practice. This woman may be skilled at basic care, but running a facility that serves the most prominent families in the region, that requires proven expertise." "She has proven expertise," Rashid said, his voice growing sharper. "She was a practicing neurologist in Ghana with..." "In Ghana," Hassan interrupted, and those 2 words carried a weight of dismissal that revealed everything about his perspective. "Brother, I understand you're grateful for the care she's provided to our father, but gratitude shouldn't cloud business judgment. The families we serve expect their loved ones to be treated by physicians trained at recognized institutions, not whatever passes for medical education in West Africa." The racial undertones in Hassan's comment hit Rashid like a slap. "Are you questioning the quality of medical education in Ghana?" Dr. Qureshi cleared his throat diplomatically. "What Mr. Hassan is saying is that there's a reason medical boards have rigorous standards for credential recognition. Patients and families need assurance that their physicians have been trained to international standards." "Esi's results speak for themselves," Rashid said, standing up from his chair. In 6 weeks, she's achieved more progress with our father than 2 years of treatment from internationally recognized specialists. Halil Al-Zahra's expression hardened. Rashid, this isn't just about your father anymore. You're proposing to create a facility that would compete directly with established medical institutions. Institutions that have spent decades building their reputations and relationships in this community. The real motivation behind this intervention was becoming clear. This wasn't about medical standards or patient safety. It was about protecting existing business interests and maintaining the status quo that kept certain people in positions of power while excluding others. Are you threatening me? Rashid asked directly. Hassan's voice grew cold. I'm trying to protect our family's reputation. Do you understand what will happen if this venture fails? If there's a medical incident, a malpractice claim, or even just negative publicity about an unqualified caregiver treating prominent families, it won't just affect you. It will damage everything our father built. Omar leaned back in his chair, his tone becoming more conciliatory, but no less manipulative. Look, Rashid, we're not saying this woman can't continue caring for your father. By all accounts, she's doing excellent work in that capacity, but running a medical facility is different. Why not leave healthcare to healthcare professionals and focus on what you do best: business development? The suggestion was wrapped in reasonable language, but Rashid understood the real message: stay in your lane, accept the existing hierarchy, and don't challenge the established order that kept power concentrated among a select few. Gentlemen, Rashid said, his voice calm but firm, I appreciate your concerns, but my decision is final. The facility will move forward as planned. Dr. Qureshi stood up, his expression disappointed. Mr. Al-Mansouri, I hope you'll reconsider. The medical community is small, and reputation matters. It would be unfortunate if your association with questionable medical practices affected your family's standing in other business ventures. The thinly veiled threat hung in the air as the 4 men filed out of the conference room, leaving Rashid alone with the realization that his partnership with Esi had made them both targets of a system that was far more entrenched and vindictive than he had anticipated. But the real crisis came 3 days later. Rashid was in Dubai for a business meeting when Fatima's frantic call shattered his afternoon. Sir, there's been an incident with Mr. Ahmed. Esi called an ambulance, but there are questions. Accusations. You need to come home immediately. The drive back to Abu Dhabi was a blur of anxiety and worst-case scenarios. When Rashid arrived at his estate, he found it surrounded by an ambulance, 2 police cars, and a small crowd of neighbors and staff. His heart sank as he spotted Hassan's car parked near the entrance. Inside the house, chaos reigned. Ahmed was conscious but clearly distressed, sitting on the living room sofa with a bandage on his forehead while a paramedic checked his vital signs. Esi stood nearby, her usual calm composure replaced by visible anxiety as she answered questions from a police officer. Hassan was deep in conversation with Dr. Qureshi, who had apparently arrived shortly after the ambulance. Both men looked up when Rashid entered, and he could see satisfaction in their expressions that made his blood run cold. What happened? Rashid demanded, going immediately to his father's side. Mr. Hamid fell in the bathroom, the paramedic explained. He has a minor head injury and appears to have been unconscious briefly, but his vitals are stable. We're recommending transport to the hospital for observation. I'm fine, Ahmed said weakly, though his confusion was evident. I just ... I couldn't remember where I was. The floor was wet, and I slipped. Rashid looked at Esi, who was finishing her conversation with the police officer. When she approached, her face was pale but determined. He was taking his afternoon shower, she explained quietly. I always stay nearby in case he needs help, but I was just outside the bathroom door. I heard the fall and went in immediately. He had hit his head on the soap dispenser, but he was conscious and responsive. So why are the police here? Rashid asked. Hassan answered before Esi could speak. Because Dr. Qureshi was concerned about the lack of proper medical supervision. When an elderly patient with dementia suffers a head injury under the care of someone without recognized medical credentials, the implication was clear and devastating. Hassan and his allies were suggesting that Esi's care had been negligent, that her lack of proper credentials had somehow contributed to Ahmed's accident. Dr. Qureshi approached with an expression of professional concern that Rashid now recognized as calculated. Rashid, I hate to say this, but this incident illustrates exactly what we were discussing earlier. Proper medical supervision might have prevented this accident, or at least ensured more appropriate immediate response. What are you talking about? Rashid snapped. Esi's response was immediate and appropriate. She assessed his condition, called for emergency services, and provided first aid. What more could anyone have done? A qualified physician would have implemented proper safety protocols, Dr. Qureshi replied smoothly. Bathroom safety for dementia patients requires specific training and equipment that Esi recommended 2 weeks ago. Rashid interrupted, his anger building. She asked for grab bars to be installed and non-slip surfaces in all the bathrooms. I approved the modifications, but they haven't been completed yet because of delays with the contractors. The police officer looked up from his notes. Sir, are you saying safety modifications were requested, but not implemented? Yes, Rashid said firmly. Ms. Asante identified potential hazards and recommended specific safety improvements. The accident occurred in an area that was scheduled for modification next week. Hassan's confident expression faltered slightly, but Dr. Qureshi pressed forward. Regardless, this incident demonstrates the risks involved when proper medical oversight isn't in place. If Mr. Ahmed had been in a licensed medical facility with proper safety protocols, he would have been miserable, Ahmed said suddenly, his voice stronger than it had been all afternoon. That woman, he pointed at Esi, is the only one who makes me feel human. Don't you dare blame her for an accident. The room fell silent. Even in his confused state, Ahmed's defense of Esi was clear and unwavering, but Rashid knew the damage was already done. Word of the incident would spread through the tight-knit community of wealthy families, carefully shaped by Hassan and his allies to paint Esi as an unqualified caregiver whose lack of proper training had endangered a vulnerable patient. As the paramedics prepared to transport Ahmed to the hospital for observation, Rashid realized that their enemies had just gained exactly the ammunition they needed to destroy everything he and Esi were trying to build. The real battle was just beginning. And the stakes had suddenly become much higher than just a business venture. They were now fighting for Esi's reputation, Ahmed's dignity, and the future of everyone who didn't fit into the established medical hierarchy's narrow definition of qualified care. Standing in his living room, watching the woman who had given his father back his humanity being treated like a criminal, Rashid made a decision that would determine whether their partnership would survive this attack or whether they would become casualties of a system designed to protect its own interests. Above all else, the hospital corridors echoed with the quiet efficiency of medical professionals going about their evening routines. But for Rashid, sitting in the uncomfortable plastic chair outside his father's room, time seemed to have stopped. Ahmed was stable. The CT scan had shown no serious brain injury, just a minor concussion that would heal with rest. But the real damage had been done in his living room earlier that afternoon, and Rashid knew that Hassan and his allies were already working to spread their version of events throughout Abu Dhabi's medical and social circles. Esi sat beside him. Her usual composure cracked but not broken. She had insisted on accompanying Ahmed to the hospital despite the hostile looks from some of the medical staff, who had clearly already heard whispers about the unqualified caregiver who had been responsible for the accident. Mr. Al-Mansouri? A young nurse approached them hesitantly. Your father is asking for both of you." They found Ahmed propped up in his hospital bed, looking small and fragile under the harsh fluorescent lights, but mentally clearer than he had been in weeks. The shock of the fall seemed to have temporarily lifted some of the fog that usually clouded his thoughts. "Rashid," he said as they entered, his voice strong despite his physical weakness. "I need to tell you something important while my mind is clear." Rashid pulled a chair close to his father's bedside. "What is it, Baba?" Ahmed's eyes moved to Esi, then back to his son. "That woman has given me more dignity in these past months than I've felt since your mother died. What happened today was not her fault. It was the fault of the bathroom that should have been modified weeks ago, and a disease that makes me forget where I am." "The modifications were approved," Rashid said. "The contractors were supposed to start next week." "I know. I remember our conversation about it." Ahmed's lucidity was remarkable, as if the crisis had temporarily burned away the confusion that usually plagued him. "But Hassan doesn't care about the truth. He cares about control. He's always resented that you found solutions he couldn't, that you succeeded where he failed." Ahmed reached for Esi's hand. "My dear, I may not remember everything, but I remember how you make me feel. Safe, valued, human. Don't let them take that away from other families who need what you can give." Esi's eyes filled with tears, but she squeezed Ahmed's hand gently. "I won't abandon you, Mr. Ahmed, no matter what they say about me." "I'm not worried about me," Ahmed replied with a slight smile. "I'm worried about you. They'll try to destroy your reputation to protect their own interests. You need to be prepared for that." As if summoned by their conversation, Dr. Qureshi appeared in the doorway, his expression carefully neutral. "Mr. Al-Mansouri, I wanted to check on your father's condition personally." Rashid stood, instinctively placing himself between the doctor and his father's bed. "He's stable, as you can see from his chart." "Excellent," Dr. Qureshi said, but his attention had shifted to Esi. "Ms. Asante, I trust you understand that there will need to be an investigation into today's incident. The hospital administration takes patient safety very seriously, especially when there are questions about the qualifications of those providing care." "What kind of investigation?" Rashid asked, his voice sharp. "Standard procedure," Dr. Qureshi replied smoothly. "When a patient suffers an injury under the care of unlicensed personnel, we're required to review the circumstances and determine whether proper protocols were followed." Ahmed's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "Doctor, with all due respect, I've been a patient in this hospital system for 2 years. I've seen your proper protocols. They involve treating people like medical specimens rather than human beings. This woman has done more for my health and dignity than your entire department." Dr. Qureshi's professional mask slipped slightly, revealing irritation beneath. "Mr. Ahmed, I understand you're grateful for Ms. Asante's care, but medical decisions should be based on objective qualifications, not emotional attachments. And what qualifications did the last 3 neurologists you recommended have?" Ahmed shot back, his business instincts still sharp despite his condition. "Besides the ability to prescribe medications that made me feel like a zombie in charge. Fees that could fund a small hospital?" The doctor's discomfort was visible now, but he pressed forward. "Sir, I'm simply trying to ensure that you receive the best possible care." "Then leave us alone," Ahmed said firmly. "The best care I've received in 2 years is sitting right here, and if you can't see that, then perhaps you're the one whose qualifications should be questioned." After Dr. Qureshi left, clearly frustrated by his inability to intimidate either Ahmed or his defenders, Rashid made a decision that would change the entire trajectory of their conflict. "See," he said, "I need you to trust me. Can you do that?" She nodded, though uncertainty flickered in her eyes. "Good, because we're not going to just defend against their attacks, we're going to expose them." Over the next 3 days, while Ahmed recovered at home and gossip about the incident spread through Abu Dhabi's social circles, Rashid launched an investigation of his own. But instead of targeting Esi, he turned his attention to the very people who were trying to destroy her. His first stop was Dr. Mahmoud, Ahmed's original neurologist who had been conspicuously absent from the hospital drama. When Rashid arrived at his office, he found the older physician visibly frustrated. "I heard about what happened," Dr. Mahmoud said before Rashid could speak. "And I heard about Qureshi's investigation. It's a disgrace. Tell me what you really think about Esi's qualifications," Rashid said directly. Dr. Mahmoud leaned back in his chair, choosing his words carefully. "Rashid, I've reviewed her assessment notes from your father's care. They're more detailed and insightful than anything I've seen from residents half her age. Her understanding of dementia progression, her documentation of behavioral patterns, her intervention strategies, everything suggests advanced medical training. But she's not part of the club. She doesn't have the right connections, the right accent, the right background story. And that threatens people who've built their careers on exclusivity rather than excellence." Dr. Mahmoud pulled a file from his desk drawer. "I took the liberty of researching her medical background in Ghana. Want to know what I found?" Rashid leaned forward. Dr. Esi Asante graduated summa cum laude from the University of Ghana Medical School. She completed her neurology residency at Korobu Teaching Hospital, one of the most respected medical institutions in West Africa. She published 6 peer-reviewed papers on dementia care in underserved populations and was being recruited by medical schools in both Europe and the United States before she made the decision to relocate. The revelation hit Rashid like a physical blow. She was recruited by universities for what? Research positions, teaching fellowships. She turned down a position at Cambridge University to care for her mother, who was dying of the same disease. She specialized in treating. Dr. Mahmoud's voice carried deep respect. "That woman has forgotten more about neurology than most of the physicians criticizing her have ever learned." Rashid felt a mixture of awe and anger wash over him. Why didn't she tell me any of this? Would it have mattered? She was applying for a caregiver position, not a medical directorship. And she's probably learned that when you're fighting for recognition in a system that doesn't want to see you, sometimes it's better to let your work speak rather than your credentials. That afternoon, armed with this new information, Rashid made a series of phone calls that would shift the balance of power in their conflict. His first call was to the Minister of Health, a reformist politician who had been advocating for innovative approaches to elder care. When Rashid described Esi's background and the opposition she was facing, the minister's response was immediate and supportive. "Mr. Al-Mansouri, this is exactly the kind of talent drain we've been trying to address. We lose qualified physicians to bureaucratic obstacles while families suffer from inadequate care. I'd like to meet with Ms. Asante personally." His second call was to the Dean of the UAE University College of Medicine, who expressed immediate interest in Esi's research background and publications. But his most important call was to Sarah Mitchell, a British journalist who specialized in healthcare issues and had been investigating medical credential recognition problems across the Gulf region. "You're telling me that a Cambridge recruited neurologist has been working as a caregiver because she can't get her credentials recognized?" Sarah asked, her voice sharp with professional interest. "And now the local medical establishment is trying to destroy her reputation because she's too effective?" "That's exactly what I'm telling you. I'll be on the next flight to Abu Dhabi. This is exactly the kind of systemic discrimination I've been documenting." While Rashid was building his counter-offensive, Esi was facing the daily reality of being under investigation. Hospital administrators had requested all her care notes for Ahmed. Medical board officials had scheduled interviews about her background, and the whisper campaign against her was growing louder. But it was Ahmed himself who provided the most powerful weapon in their arsenal. During one of his clearer moments, he asked Rashid to bring him a video camera. "If they want to question Esi's qualifications," he said, "they can answer to me first." What Ahmed recorded that afternoon would become the cornerstone of their defense. Sitting in his favorite chair in the garden, wearing his best suit and speaking with the authority that had once commanded boardrooms across the Middle East, Ahmed delivered a testimony that was both heartbreaking and devastating to their opponents. "My name is Rashid Al-Mansouri," he began, his voice strong despite the tremor in his hands. "I am 78 years old and I have Alzheimer's disease. For the past 2 years, I have been treated by some of the most expensive and supposedly qualified physicians in this region. They prescribed medications that dulled my mind, implemented protocols that stripped away my dignity, and treated me like a medical problem to be managed rather than a human being to be cared for." He paused, looking directly into the camera. "6 months ago, my son hired a woman named Dr. Esi Asante to care for me. I call her doctor because that is what she is, regardless of what papers she carries. Under her care, I have remembered what it feels like to be human. I have rediscovered joy, dignity, and hope. I have had conversations with my son that I thought I would never have again." Ahmed's voice grew stronger as he continued. "Now, there are people trying to destroy this woman's reputation because she threatens their monopoly on medical authority. They are using an accident that occurred because safety modifications I approved were delayed by contractors to question her qualifications. Let me be clear, Dr. Esi Asante's qualifications are not measured by the recognition of a medical board that has never bothered to understand what patients actually need. Her qualifications are measured by the fact that she gave me back my life." When the video ended, Ahmed looked at Rashid with eyes that were crystal clear. "Now, let's see them argue with that." The battle lines were drawn, and Rashid knew that the next phase of their conflict would determine not just the future of their medical facility, but whether qualified physicians from around the world would be welcomed in the UAE or forced to hide their talents behind artificial barriers. The war for recognition had begun, and they were about to discover just how far their opponents were willing to go to maintain their stranglehold on medical authority. The conference room at the UAE Ministry of Health had never hosted a meeting quite like this one. On one side of the polished table sat Rashid Al-Mansouri, Dr. Qureshi, and Halil Al-Zahra, their expensive suits and confident postures reflecting their certainty that institutional power would prevail as it always had. On the other side sat Rashid, Esi, Dr. Mahmoud, and Sarah Mitchell, the British journalist whose investigation had sent shockwaves through the medical community over the past week. At the head of the table, Minister Ahmed bin Rashid Al Maktoum reviewed the documents, spread before him with the careful attention of someone who understood that this decision would set precedent far beyond a single case. "Before we begin," the minister said, his voice carrying the authority of his position, "I want everyone to understand that we're not here to relitigate a bathroom accident. We're here to address fundamental questions about medical credential, recognition, patient care standards, and whether our healthcare system serves the people it's meant to protect." Sarah Mitchell had done her work thoroughly. Her investigative series, published simultaneously in The Guardian and several Middle Eastern publications, had exposed not just Esi's case, but a pattern of qualified physicians from Africa and Asia being systematically excluded from practice in the Gulf states. Despite critical shortages in specialized care, the headlines alone had been devastating to Hassan's position. Cambridge recruited neurologist works as caregiver due to UAE credential barriers and medical monopoly. How Gulf healthcare excludes qualified doctors based on origin, not ability. But it was Ahmed's video testimony that had truly changed the narrative. Within 48 hours of its release on social media, it had been viewed over 2 million times, shared by prominent families dealing with dementia, and sparked a public conversation about dignity in elder care that could no longer be ignored. Dr. Qureshi shifted uncomfortably in his chair as the minister continued. "Dr. Qureshi, I've reviewed your concerns about Ms. Asante's qualifications. However, I've also reviewed her actual credentials, which are quite impressive. Would you care to explain why a neurologist who was recruited by Cambridge University and published in the Journal of Neurological Sciences was deemed unqualified to practice in our healthcare system? Dr. Qureshi's confident facade began to crack. Minister, the credential recognition process exists to ensure that foreign-trained physicians meet our standards. What standards? Dr. Mahmood interrupted, leaning forward. I've reviewed Dr. Asante's medical training curriculum. The University of Ghana's neurology program has higher requirements for clinical hours than most European programs. Her residency at Coral Boot Teaching Hospital exposed her to case volumes and disease complexity that most physicians here will never encounter. Esi had remained quiet throughout the exchange, but now she spoke with quiet dignity. Minister, if I may address the real issue here, this isn't about whether my education was adequate. It's about whether the medical community is willing to judge physicians by their results rather than their connections. She pulled out a folder from her bag. I've brought documentation of my work with Mr. Ahmed over the past 6 months. Behavioral assessments, medication optimization recommendations, and outcome measurements. I'd like Dr. Qureshi to review them and tell this room whether they represent substandard care. The challenge hung in the air. Dr. Qureshi reluctantly accepted the documents, and as he read through them, his expression changed from defensive confidence to obvious discomfort. These are quite comprehensive, he admitted grudgingly. They're also more detailed than anything your department has produced in 2 years of treating Mr. Ahmed. Rashid added pointedly. Hassan, who had been growing increasingly agitated as the meeting progressed, finally exploded. This is ridiculous. We're seriously considering dismantling our medical standards because of one caregiver's success with one patient. One caregiver? Sarah Mitchell spoke for the first time, her British accent cutting through the tension. In the past week, I've interviewed 15 families in the UAE who are struggling with inadequate dementia care. 12 of them expressed interest in seeking treatment from Dr. Asante, based solely on Ahmed Al-Mansouri's video testimony. This isn't about one patient, it's about a healthcare system that prioritizes credentials over competence. The minister nodded thoughtfully. Ms. Mitchell raises an important point. We're facing a crisis in elder care, particularly for neurodegenerative diseases. Our current system clearly isn't meeting the needs of our population. Halil Al-Zahra, who had been silent until now, finally spoke. Minister, with respect, we can't simply ignore established protocols because of media pressure. There are liability issues, insurance considerations, regulatory compliance, all of which, the minister replied smoothly, can be addressed through proper oversight and partnership. Which brings us to the proposal that Mr. Al-Mansouri has submitted. Rashid stood, activating a presentation screen that displayed architectural plans and organizational charts. Minister, distinguished colleagues, what we're proposing isn't the destruction of medical standards, it's their evolution. The Al-Mansouri Center for Dignity in Elder Care would operate as a public-private partnership, combining internationally trained physicians like Dr. Asante with local medical oversight and cutting-edge research. The presentation revealed months of careful planning. The facility would serve as a training center for culturally sensitive dementia care, a research institute for innovative treatment approaches, and most importantly, a place where families could find the kind of comprehensive care that honored both medical excellence and human dignity. Dr. Asante would serve as Director of Patient-Centered Care. Rashid continued, working under the medical directorship of Dr. Mahmood while completing her UAE credential recognition. The facility would also partner with UAE University's medical school to develop new curricula for dementia care that emphasizes the integration of clinical expertise with cultural sensitivity. Esi stood to add her perspective. What we're proposing is a model that other countries could replicate. Instead of wasting the talents of qualified physicians due to bureaucratic barriers, we create pathways for them to contribute while meeting local regulatory requirements. The minister looked around the table. And the opposition to this proposal? Hassan's response was immediate and revealing. The medical community has legitimate concerns about maintaining standards and protecting established institutions. Whose standards? Dr. Mahmoud asked sharply. And which institutions? Because from where I sit, those established institutions have failed Mr. Ahmed and hundreds of other patients. Meanwhile, Dr. Asante has achieved in 6 months what they couldn't accomplish in 2 years. Sarah Mitchell consulted her notes. In my investigation, I found that the UAE currently has a 40% shortage of geriatric specialists and an 85% shortage of dementia care specialists. Yet qualified physicians like Dr. Asante are forced to work as caregivers because of credential recognition barriers that often take 3 to 5 years to navigate. The damning statistics hung in the air, and Hassan's position became increasingly untenable. The minister made his decision with the confidence of someone who understood both the political and practical implications. After reviewing all the evidence presented, it's clear that Dr. Asante represents exactly the kind of medical talent we need to attract and retain in the UAE. I'm authorizing the immediate establishment of the Al-Mansouri Center under the terms proposed, with Dr. Asante serving in the specified role while her credential recognition is expedited through a new fast-track program for internationally trained specialists. He turned to Dr. Qureshi and his allies. Furthermore, I'm ordering a comprehensive review of our credential recognition processes to identify and eliminate barriers that prevent qualified physicians from contributing to our healthcare system. This review will be conducted in partnership with international medical organizations to ensure we're meeting global standards for inclusivity and effectiveness. Hassan's face had gone pale, realizing that his attempt to destroy Esi had instead catalyzed systemic changes that would benefit thousands of physicians and patients. But the minister wasn't finished. Dr. Qureshi, your conduct throughout this investigation has raised serious questions about bias and professional ethics. You'll be subject to a formal review by the medical board regarding your fitness to serve in leadership positions. 6 months later, the Al-Mansouri Center for Dignity and Elder Care opened its doors in a beautifully designed facility that felt more like a luxury residence than a medical institution. The opening ceremony drew international attention, with healthcare officials from around the world coming to observe what was being hailed as a revolutionary model for elder care. Ahmed Al-Mansouri, now Dr. Asante's first official patient in her new role as Director of Patient-Centered Care, had continued to thrive. While his Alzheimer's disease continued its inevitable progression, his quality of life remained remarkably high. He participated in the center's research programs, mentored other families dealing with dementia, and had become an unexpected advocate for healthcare reform. During the opening ceremony, Ahmed insisted on giving a speech. Standing at the podium with Esi beside him for support, he addressed the assembled crowd with the authority that had once commanded business empires but now served a higher purpose. 6 months ago, I was disappearing into a disease that steals minds and dignity. He began, his voice strong despite his physical frailty. Today, I stand before you as proof that excellent medical care and human compassion are not opposing forces. They are essential partners in healing. He turned to look at Esi, who had tears in her eyes. Dr. Asante didn't just give me back my sense of self. She showed my son and this community that expertise comes in many forms, from many places, and that our job isn't to build walls around excellence, but to recognize it wherever it appears. The applause was thunderous, but Ahmed wasn't finished. This center exists because we chose to judge a physician by her healing rather than her passport, by her results rather than her connections. I hope it serves as a reminder that the best medicine is practiced when we treat each other with the dignity every human being deserves. As the months passed, the center's success exceeded everyone's expectations. The fast-track credential recognition program had brought dozens of qualified physicians from around the world to practice in the UAE. Medical schools began incorporating the center's patient-centered care model into their curricula. Most importantly, families dealing with dementia finally had a place where their loved ones could receive world-class medical care without sacrificing their humanity. Hassan had quietly resigned from his position in the family business, his reputation irreparably damaged by his role in trying to suppress qualified medical care based on prejudice rather than performance. Dr. Qureshi had been removed from his leadership position and transferred to a role with no decision-making authority over credential recognition or patient care policies, but the real victory was measured in smaller, more personal ways. In the laughter of elderly patients who had rediscovered joy in their final chapters, in the relief of families who no longer had to choose between medical expertise and compassionate care, in the dozens of qualified physicians who could now practice their calling without hiding their talents behind artificial barriers. One evening, as the sun set over the gardens of the Al-Mansouri Center, Rashid found Esi and his father sitting beneath the same tree where they had shared so many conversations. Ahmed was reading aloud from a book of Arabic poetry, his voice carrying the melody of words that transcended the boundaries of memory and disease. "You know," Rashid said, joining them on the bench, "when I first hired you, I thought I was just finding someone to care for my father." Esi smiled, her attention still focused on Ahmed's recitation. "And now I realize you were caring for all of us. You healed my father, transformed our healthcare system, and taught me that the most important qualifications can't be measured by certificates or connections." Ahmad looked up from his book, his eyes bright with the satisfaction of someone who had found purpose in unexpected places. "My son, the greatest leaders are often those who don't seek power, but simply do the work that needs to be done, with excellence and humility." He gestured toward the center's buildings, where lights were beginning to come on as the evening shift of caregivers arrived. Dr. Asante didn't come here to revolutionize anything. She came to care for one confused old man. But excellence has a way of expanding beyond its original boundaries. As the three of them sat together in the gathering darkness, surrounded by the quiet sounds of a facility where healing happened through both medical expertise and human connection, they represented something powerful, the possibility that occurs when talent is recognized regardless of its origin, when dignity is prioritized alongside treatment, and when one person's courage to see beyond surface appearances creates opportunities for transformation that benefit everyone. The hidden cameras that had once been tools of surveillance had become instruments of revelation, capturing not just the evidence of Esi's extraordinary abilities, but the proof that the most important healing often happens when we choose to see the person behind the credentials, the human being behind the diagnosis, and the possibilities that emerge when we have the courage to look beyond our assumptions. In the end, it wasn't the cameras that revealed Esi's secret, it was her results. And those results had changed not just one family's story, but the entire system's understanding of what it means to provide truly excellent care. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.